only thing we can be sure of about the future is that it will be absolutely fantastic.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
And human culture generally, in effect, has spent a lot of time telling itself scary stories. Vengeful gods, evil demons, ghosts, resentful ghosts, vampires, zombies, you get the whole list of them.
Hello, you're listening to Into the Impossible, a podcast of stories, ideas, and speculations from the Arthur C. Clarke Center for Human Imagination. I'm Patrick Coleman, host of the show, and we're going to do something a little bit different today. In honor of Halloween, I want to tell something of a spooky story. And then we'll step back from that and speak with Dr. Christopher Collins, author of the books Paleopoetics, The Evolution of the Preliterate Imagination, and Neopoetics, The Evolution of the Literate Imagination.
My name is Christopher Collins. I'm Professor Emeritus of English at New York University.
He's here to help me think through the relationship between imagination and fear. And the story I want to tell you actually involves the making of this podcast. So, this was a few months ago, and I was working on editing the next episode of the show. Now, this was late at night. I was at home. I live very rurally, with no neighbors, surrounded by California chaparral on all sides. It's dark. At night, where I live, you hear coyotes often. If you listen very carefully, sometimes you can even hear the lions down at the San Diego Zoo Safari Park. And so it can be a very peaceful, but already a little bit of a lonely place. My kids were asleep. My wife was in the back. I'm in the living room. I've got my computer. I'm in my audio production software. I'm cutting clips. I'm moving music around, working up against a deadline. When all of a sudden, the sound coming through my headphones just cuts out and is replaced by a sound that I can't really identify at first, but that very quickly, almost bodily, I recognize as breathing. As soon as I hear this sound, my body freezes. I get this huge rush of adrenaline. I'm immediately petrified, even as my rational mind is already saying, this is some sort of technical glitch. This is nothing to worry about. Instinctually, I'm perceiving that something unusual is happening. There's a sound that I can't quite identify, but that sounds like a threat. And I'm alone. And so I sit there just listening to it for a minute, trying to calm myself down, trying to listen harder, to pick out some artifacts of the recording that make it clear it's artificial, that it's something in my technology going awry, but it keeps sounding like the organic sound of a beast breathing. So then there's sort of a second step that my mind automatically seems to make. My microphone isn't on. There's no audio input going into my computer. This must be a demon, a spirit, something supernatural. I should say I don't believe in the supernatural. I don't believe in ghosts. I did grow up Catholic and consumed as much of the spooky media as a kid growing up in the 80s and 90s could. So I have all those stories in my mind, and those stories immediately rise back to the surface, and I'm considering them as maybe true. And I look at my computer, and all the controls in my audio software are locked. I can't I can't stop, I can't pause, I can't fast forward, I can't reverse. And the audio meter, I notice, that checks the level of the sound coming in, and if it gets too loud, it goes up into red. It's rising with the sound of this breathing. And it's hitting the red hard when it's really loud. It's clipping, and it's really intense. And I'm genuinely scared. I still don't think there's something unexplainable happening, but I'm reacting. My body is 100% reacting to this. And so I think, as scientifically as I can in the moment, I can't explain the sound. I'm going to record the sound now, but the controls are locked. I can't record the sound. I can't preserve this in any way. This is a live sound somehow getting inputted into my computer, even though I have no input connected. That is then coming through the headphones straight into my ears, and to me feels like I'm hearing a demon below the floor of my house, breathing and thinking about rising up to grab me. So I do that thing that happens in the movies when someone's got headphones on and they hear a strange sound. I yank the cord out of the computer for no real reason, but I do confirm that the sound continues to come out of the computer's onboard speakers. For some reason, this makes me more scared. I run in and I check on the kids. They're fine, of course. I go get my wife. I tell her what's happening. By the time we come back out, the sound is gone. It's over. There's no trace of this experience left that I can point to, besides my own recollection of it. And the obvious panic in my face, the jitteriness of my voice, all the physiological signs that my wife can see that I'm not pulling her leg, that I've had a kind of genuine experience. To this day, I still have no idea what was going on there. So if you're a podcast producer, an audio engineer, if you've had any experience like this, please do get in touch. I would love to find out exactly what the glitch was that would cause that to happen. I do not believe it's a demon, but I'm enough of a, sort of existential agnostic to keep that door open just slightly, just a tiny bit. And this experience got me thinking about the relationship between fear and imagination. And how quickly, for me, in this one experience, I went from hearing something that I couldn't explain to imagining a worldly threat, say like a lion or something, is somehow has a microphone, a wireless microphone outside my house, and is just messing with me. To then the next step of connecting it with stories that I grew up on, that kind of form some of the essential cultural DNA that I happen to have. And so then I am capable of imagining a supernatural explanation for this, imagining something beyond the five senses. And so to explore some of these questions a little bit more, I got in touch with Christopher Collins. He's been working in the area of understanding the evolution of imagination from a variety of points of view: cognitive science, neuroscience, and cultural studies combined. And he was kind enough to let me pick his brain about this particular experience and what the relationship between fear and imagination can tell us about how our imaginative capacities evolved from our early days, and how they are used and in some senses abused in the present.
Imagination has been a subject that I've come back to for several decades, so I guess I'm stuck with that now myself.
Over those decades, Dr. Collins has explored the evolution of imagination, from the emergence of Homo sapiens to our more sophisticated present. There's something special, it seems, about the ear as a pathway to fear. And there's also a deeper connection between the auditory and visual imaginations that I'm interested to explore.
We're primates, like the apes, and that we're all born with a fear of the dark. And one of the reasons for that is that primates, all primates, I guess, have very good daytime eyesight, but have very poor nighttime eyesight. So what they do is they sleep at night. They go up in the tree. The apes go up in the tree, and we go behind locked doors, and we close our eyes, and body senses kind of fall away, and we fall asleep, as we say. We're not getting any more feedback from the body. The only place where we're getting feedback potentially is through our ears, because we can't shut our ears. So we're monitoring our environment while we're asleep, and we do that kind of selectively. For example, if you live in the city, you kind of filter out the sounds of, say, police sirens. It could be very loud, but you're really focusing on the possibility of, say, a creaking floor outside your door, or some sort of rustle at the window, or if you have a fire escape, even scarier. So that might wake you right up. So hearing noisy breathing makes me think of, if we look back into really primordial human times, the possibility of, say, a big cat prowling, because the cats prowl at night and the primates go up in the trees. So the feeling of hearing sort of mouth breathing, that kind of breathing, could be very scary at a very deep level. One of those instincts that we have as humans that our primate cousins also have, the fear of snakes and the fear of spiders. I think this auditory fear is a very potent fear. If you think of picking up a phone and hearing somebody just breathing like that, that's a stereotypical horror scenario. Think about radio programs and even podcasts, when they're solely auditory, can potentially prompt the fear response. I was just thinking, apropos of Halloween, how Halloween in 1938, if you're listening to the radio, you might have heard Orson Welles' version of War of the Worlds. Remember that story about how they, all over America, whoever was listening to that, started to believe that Martians were actually arriving in Grover's Mill, New Jersey? He did it so well, so that everybody listening to it starts to see, because hearing and fearing, it sounds like just an accidental rhyme, but there's much more of a connection, I think, between hearing and fearing.
In fact, there's something especially potent about being presented with sound alone.
So when we can only hear but can't see, we feel a little uneasy. And if the sound seems close to us, and it happens to be breathing, we might well assume that there's some conscious being out there that has some particular intention toward us. So until we know what it is that is making that sound, we visualize what it might be. So there's where the imagination comes in as a substitute for actually seeing. The mind produces the image of something that we think may be the case. That a famous passage in Midsummer Night's Dream, where King Theseus does this whole thing about imagination. Lovers and madmen are so often deluded by their own imagination. And he ends that speech, I think he ends the speech with the line something like this, about how in the night, imagining some fear, how easy is a bush supposed a bear. So if you're already having some fearful imagining, then the mental imagery can become very foregrounded to you. But of course, some bushes are bears, turn out to be, So we have to always remember that the fear response is an adaptation that's helped the human species survive. It's something that is an important part of our genetic heritage.
In Dr. Collins's work, he's especially interested in questions around the evolution of language and its relationship to imagination. Part of what makes language special and useful from an evolutionary point of view is its ability to take the mental images one cave person has and share them with another. At first, this might be simply pointing toward things, as if to communicate, "Do you see that tiger?" Or, "Here, eat this root vegetable." As language develops complexity, so does its ability to refer to objects that aren't immediately present, to communicate about a person who isn't there in that moment, a threat that isn't seen, to refer to what has happened in the past and what may happen in the future.
Language is the system that has empowered cultural evolution and everything that comes out of that for us. Cultural evolution as a building upon the foundation of biological evolution. And it's important to keep in mind how language began and continues to be an auditory medium. This means that the same kind of relationship between sound and imagery also happens through language as it does through hearing fearful sounding breathing and then imagining what that thing might be that's causing it. Sounds in the dark naturally evoke visual images, and so do any sounds, including the sounds we do when we talk with one another. There's that hookup that's pretty close, I think, between the auditory networks in the brain and the visual networks. As soon as we hear something, we want to convert that into a visual format.
In thinking about instinctual response and our responses to language, it does make you think about the question of cultural evolution and how it represents another layer that conditions our imagination. Even in the moment, hearing that strange breathing, I was thinking to myself, my God, what a cliche. It's the same old thing you see in films about electronic voice phenomena or spirits trying to make contact from the other side. But those are part of the cultural inheritance I was raised up on, alongside the supernatural narratives of good and evil in the Bible and others that seem to build upon those more primal responses and imaginings.
Well, this is one speculation, and it makes a lot of sense to me, that language emerged, its emergence was accelerated by the management of fire and the ability to stay up at night and cook and talk and feel that you have a certain defense against the predators that might be lurking out there in the darkness. And so the stories that we can imagine began to be developed at night are probably the same sort of ghost stories that kids get to hear and talk about around campfires at summer camp. Scary things. Human culture has certainly the power to manipulate fear, and I think maybe we don't have to look at that as necessarily a good thing, but it's a power mechanism, right? You can scare people using language, using stories. And human culture generally, in effect, has spent a lot of time telling itself scary stories. Vengeful gods, evil demons, ghosts, resentful ghosts, vampires, zombies, you get the whole list of them. All those night stalkers. They're always connected with the night, too, because, again, it's the old primate business of not wanting to go out there at night because we can't see where we're going.
So stories can and do play on our fears of the unknown. Literal dangers lurking in the shadows, supernatural forces, and also the shadowy nature of the future itself. There's a reason dystopian stories are in right now, but the roots go much deeper.
The function of writing, the writing down of stories, to preserve the stories, has been a major factor in the development of various cultures, last couple of millennia at least. And whenever we hear stories or read stories, because here's where the literate part comes in to supplement the oral part, whenever we hear or read stories, we're converting everything into images. And if you think about Western religious tradition, and think about the major book that stands right there as the very beginning and the core of it, the Bible, you can see the Bible has served as a book of fear-inducing supernatural imagery from the very beginning, and has inspired other kinds of stories. Over the summer, I was reading through some of the writings of the Desert Fathers, including Anthony the Great. And in his biography of Anthony the Great, his friend Athanasius of Alexandria wrote this book that we get most of what we know about Anthony's visions, and his scary visions out there all by himself in the dark, in the desert. And it was interesting for me to note that that was one of the consistent bestsellers throughout the Middle Ages. So if you think about how Christian culture, and not necessarily Christian theology, but Christian culture broadly, has so absorbed all of this folklore of fearfulness.
For all the storytellers steeped in that tradition, that means
you can understand why their imagery may be obsessively supplied with supernatural spirits of malignant intent.
This song is about teaching children to worship Satan.
that had to be part of the supply of imagery my mind was drawing on. I grew up with a lot of those stories, generously supplanted by Tales from the Crypt and Tales from the Dark Side, Pet Cemetery, Scary Stories Volume 1 through 3, and all the rest.
Man lives in the sunlit world of what he believes to be reality. But there is, unseen by most, an underworld, a place that is just as real, but not as brightly lit. A dark side.
These are perhaps part of the cultural evolution that made an expanded range of fear-worthy things available for contemplation. More broadly, it got me wondering about the evolutionary advantage of our ability to run these kinds of fear-based counterfactuals, as in asking, what would I do if that bush is actually a bear? Or if this mole on my back corresponds to that picture of a cancerous mole on WebMD? Or how in 20 years climate change will have impacted the environment where I live?
I think that when fear paralyzes one, it's not a good thing. And when it creates anxiety, it's probably not a good thing. The practice of vigilance is probably, certainly is a good thing.
Cultural evolution of the imagination has also attempted to create the tools that might allow us to transcend those fears.
The medieval Christian cosmos was filled with angels and demons all over the place, but there was a single God, albeit in three persons, but a single Godhead, that if you could get that person's on your side, you wouldn't have the fear of all of those other forces in the universe. So I think in a way, monotheism might have been a way to overcome this free-floating anxiety that the world would be in if every night was Halloween.
Halloween is just around the corner, and there are plenty of us living with that free-floating, every day is Halloween kind of anxiety. So, be safe out there, have fun, and don't let your ability to imagine frightening things paralyze you. This has been Into the Impossible, a podcast from the Arthur C. Clarke Center for Human Imagination at UC San Diego. We'd like to thank Dr. Christopher Collins and our generous patrons and sponsors, including Viasat Inc., members of the Founders Orbit, and the James B. Axe Family Foundation. Your support is much appreciated. To find out more about the Clarke Center and other exciting projects, research, and programs, as well as how to support our mission, please visit imagination.ucsd.edu or find us on Twitter or Facebook. Coming up on December 7th, we have the science fiction writer Andy Weir coming to the campus. It's going to be great. You won't want to miss it. Audio production of this episode is by Patrick Coleman and Wes Hawkins, produced by Patrick Coleman and Sheldon Brown. And thanks to all of you for listening, sharing the podcast with your friends, and leaving reviews. It's all very appreciated, and it helps us very, very much.
The only thing we can be sure of about the future is that it will be absolutely fantastic.
5, 4,